this is UKRLIFE with Lyudmila Nemyrya, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev, and we are very happy that our guest today is General Ben Hodges. General, good morning. Thank you so much to be with us today.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you. General, over the last few days, you and your colleague have proposed some very concrete help to Ukraine. And let's start from your article for Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. Let me quote you. By engaging in direct negotiation with Moscow, openly criticizing Ukraine and protecting Russia at the United Nations, the US is siding its European allies. How to respond? By immediately deploying forces to Ukraine to ensure its security and shift the balance of peace negotiations, even without US military backup. Are you suggesting to do this before the ceasefire? How it could look like, and do you think that it is possible in reality?
So the force the forces we're talking about would be to implement the ceasefire. Nobody expects that Russia will live up to any ceasefire agreement, and so there will have to be a force that's there to compel them to live up to the ceasefire agreement. So that's what we're talking about, is the force that's there. Now, I think it will be months before any kind of credible force that will have the deterrent capability that Russia would respect, and to have the rules of engagement that would allow this force to punish or make Russia feel consequences when they do violate the ceasefire. So I think this is still a ways off, but I would not expect anybody to do this until we had a ceasefire agreement.
And in that case, we have next very important question. How ceasefire is possible right now?
Yeah. Well, of course, Russia has to agree to do it as well. And this is not something that can be forced on Ukraine or Russia by the United States. This has to be something where the Russians realize that their only hope is to get a ceasefire, but where the Ukrainians also feel safe and that they're confident that Russia would not violate the ceasefire, which is unfortunately unlikely. But step back from this for just a minute. I think we have to think about this in three phases, and I'm talking about to resolve the conflict. And keeping in mind that because Ukraine is a sovereign state, because European countries are sovereign states, they are not obligated to have to accept whatever the United States and Russia might agree. So I know that Ukrainians know that, but it's useful to remind people that if it's not good for Ukraine, they don't have to accept whatever is negotiated. Okay, so three phases. Phase one is preparation. Phase two is ceasefire and deployment of the ceasefire implementation force. And phase three, negotiation. Now, these are not clean, exact phases, but it's three, broadly speaking, phases where things have to happen. And I think this is the sequence. What we're seeing right now, all the conversations in Riyadh, in Washington, in Brussels, in London, in Paris, all of these different things, in Kyiv, this is the preparation phase where everybody is out trying to figure out a way, how do you get to a ceasefire and how do you set up the process for negotiations? You know, people were complaining, we don't have a seat at the table. There is no table. And so Ukraine, European countries have to engage, of course, in all these different conversations to help arrive at what a ceasefire, how it should look. And then, of course, at the same time, what should a force look like? What will it need? What will its mission be? The most important question. When those things are worked out finally, then a ceasefire is established and the force is there to implement it, to make sure that Russia and Ukraine do not violate the ceasefire. That's phase two, the deployment of the force and the establishment of the ceasefire. Phase three would be the actual final negotiations, because I'm sure I would that Ukraine, your government, would not be likely to negotiate if Russia is routinely violating the ceasefire. So, because you'd have no confidence, no reason to trust. So I think that that's kind of the sequence I see: preparation, ceasefire, and deployment of implementation force and negotiation.
General, I'm pretty sure that you see different complicated situation in different parts of the world, but what's happened right now, it is just extremely unexpected situation because too many emotion in Ukraine is understandable, more or less, yeah. But in America, why? What's happened? It's extremely emotion situation. I don't understand.
Me either. I have to say that last Friday, watching President Zelensky in the Oval Office, that was one of the worst days of my life. I mean, as a professional, it was very, very difficult to watch, to see how my president and my vice president were so rude, and the way they treated a president of a sovereign country, a democratic country fighting for survival, how he was treated in the Oval Office. I mean, I don't have any good words to describe it except to say that I was embarrassed and angry. And then, of course, two things for me that became apparent during that debacle in the Oval Office. Number one was it's very clear, the mask is off, that the administration has sided with Russia, that they're no longer this, you know, trying to be a neutral, because everything, all the criticism, all the pressure is on Ukraine. So that part was hard for me as somebody who was an army officer for almost 40 years, member of NATO, to see this happening. So that was number one. Number two, I also recognized that the people around the president either don't or won't understand the nature of war and why people fight. When the president's yelling at your president, "You've got no cards," meaning there's no way you can win, you've got no advantages. I thought, well, that's not true at all. Of course, Ukraine has cards. I mean, after 11 years, Russia has still not been able to defeat Ukraine with every advantage. I think Russia is in big trouble. And so to say that there's no way that Ukraine has no cards, that tells me that they don't understand why people fight. That war is not just about math, who has the most people, the most technology. It's about what's in here, and the will to fight. And clearly, Ukraine does have that more than Russia. I mean, we lost our war against the Taliban. Clearly, the Taliban did not have the cards, but they defeated us. Same in Vietnam. The Viet Cong did not have the cards, but they defeated us. And so I think, and even in our own revolution, we did not have the cards 250 years ago against the British Empire, but we won. So that worries me, that the president and vice president and people around them don't understand the nature of war or why people fight.
General, we have a very complicated situation on the different battlefields right now, and in Kursk especially, just when we talk. But I remember very good that last year, or maybe a year ago, some Americans, for example, Mr. Blinken, say that in one day the situation on the battlefield will be in some balance when none country can push forward, and it will be some balance on the battlefield. And in that situation, negotiation and ceasefire will be possible. Do you think that now we have such situations on the battlefield?
I never accepted that we would get to a point where there was a balance or stalemate where neither side could win. if we were not using all of our economic tools. And we have not used all of our economic tools. We have not taken the steps necessary to wreck Russia's oil and gas industry. We have not taken the steps necessary to prevent them from exporting oil and gas to India and China. If we did that, then they would not be able to get the money they need to buy ammunition from North Korea or drones from Iran or technologies from China. So we haven't even tried to use our best weapons, which are economic weapons. And of course, the United States never um, made the commitment to help Ukraine win, to deliver everything that was needed without restriction. And Europe has not yet done that, although you can feel there's a growing energy in European countries to do more. So I would say what's impressive is that Ukraine has stopped Russia without us, the West, even really trying. So I think that I'm not prepared to say we're at that stalemate now where there's no way that Ukraine can win or that it's a stalemate. I'm not prepared to say that as long as Ukrainians are willing to continue fighting.
General, yesterday, many people in Ukraine discuss the Sky Shield as a practical security guarantee for Ukraine. I know that you've seen this document. And could you tell a little bit about this strategy? What does it mean and how it could be real, how it could be realized, and when it could be realized? Because it is a very good idea for Ukrainians, you know.
Well, of course, what we're talking about is trying to use Western assets to at least protect a part of Ukraine from these attacks against civilian infrastructure, against innocent people, which is the same thing we did when we were against the Houthis, shooting down missiles that were being fired out into the Red Sea against commercial shipping. It's the same thing we did in Israel, where the US, UK, France, and Jordan helped the Israeli Air Force knock down Iranian missiles that were headed towards Israeli civilian infrastructure and populations. So I know some people will be squeamish that somehow this might lead to direct confrontation with Russia, but what we're talking about is shooting down missiles and drones that are headed towards civilian targets. I think it's our duty to do this, and shame on us for not having done it yet. If there's going to be a ceasefire implementation force, you would have to have air defense anyway before you put these soldiers out on the ground in Ukraine, where they will be subject to attack by Russian drones and missiles anyhow. So this seems to me to be an important thing to do in general to protect innocent people and infrastructure, so that Ukraine can use its air and missile defense in other places, but also it's a necessary step as part of our ability to deploy a ceasefire implementation force.
When you say about the European-led integrated air protected zone, I just remember my last interview with some Western experts who say that America is ready to destroy the NATO. Even some experts from European countries say me that. Do you think that this is a real problem and how it could work? And do you think, because some experts, even some Western leaders say that it could happen situation where NATO will survive till the summer summit. It's unexpected thing. Do you think what will happen with NATO?
Well, for the first time in my life, I have worried about actions that the president would take regarding NATO. But whenever he does or says things that causes people to doubt American commitment, it's not good for America. I mean, this doesn't advance America's interest. So I don't understand when he says things like Yes, of course, if there's an Article 5 attack, but we will defend only those who are doing their part of spending versus everybody. I mean, that really erodes the confidence that people have. Now, of course, he's correct, as was every other American president, to say that our allies have got to do more. But the alliance has been successful for more than 75 years because of the absolute ironclad commitment of all the nations to come to each other's um, assistance. And I'm appalled that he says things like, "Do you think the French would come to our aid?" Well, they did. Everybody in NATO came to our aid after 9/11. So either he really does not understand or doesn't care, or doesn't listen, or people around him don't have the courage to say, "Well, Mr. President, actually the French did come to our aid, as did the Poles, as did the Netherlands, as did everybody else in NATO." So um, I know he has this reputation as a big negotiator. He's the real estate guy, and so he approaches these things in a sort of transactional way. Um, I can, I'm an optimist. You've known me for years now, Lyudmila. I am an optimist, and I have to believe that enough good people that understand the importance of NATO for America will help guide us through this period. So I'm not prepared to say that he's trying to destroy the alliance, or that he plans to get out. I actually don't think he will. I think he sees this as a way to use leverage to get other people to do more of their share. I just It's hard to watch.
Let's say a couple of words about China's position in that situation. It is very interesting that China push the European countries and Ukraine to sit around the table of negotiation table. Why China is so interested in that?
Um, well, I think China's number one goal is making sure that they want stability for their own purposes, economically as well as for security. They also, I believe, want continued access to cheap Russian oil and gas. They don't want anything to disrupt that. And um, I think they also are trying to preserve all their options to do what they want to do. And so, um, but I don't know enough about their specific interests of how the Chinese might view um, a negotiated settlement as the U.S. has proposed so far versus something where Russia loses something. And of course, the Chinese, I imagine, would be prepared immediately to come in and say, "Hey, we would like the mineral deal. We would like to be the ones that to extract all this from Ukrainian soil, or let us operate the ports in Crimea or something like that." So I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm sure that they generally want stability. They want to have influence in this region of this part of Europe, and they want to continue to have cheap access to cheap Russian oil and gas.
Do you think that any agreement among USA and Russia is a problem for China?
Not any agreement. Um, I imagine, there are some people that talk about that the U.S. and Russia together could have more than enough power to stop China. So, some people speculate about that, and maybe there's something to it. I don't know. I don't think I don't see Russia as a reliable ally. I mean, that's not somebody that we should see that we could trust. And Russia has not changed or backed away from any of its wartime objectives. So I just don't see anything good for us siding with them.
And let's back to Russia, because now many people say that Russia is not interested in ceasefire, and that is why they said that they want everything. Do you think that it's really true, and how for you looks like the military situation for Russia? I mean, their army, their strategy, their tactic, and how you understand the situation?
I don't see that there's any interest on the Russian side in actually having a ceasefire. I mean, if the Russians really wanted peace, they could stop now. They could cease fire right now. They don't need us to make them cease fire. So they're not interested in doing that. And I think that the Kremlin believes that they are winning, and that because they can see that American support, the things that the U.S. government has done, turning off intelligence, stopping the flow of aid, and offering all kinds of carrots to the Russians. I mean, why would the Russians stop? Now, my president, claims to have all kinds of special negotiating powers, and that the Russians will respect him and come along. I just don't see any evidence of that.
And last question: if we will have no military support from USA, do you think that Europe could compensate this from?
I think that Europe, if they can work together and are willing to make some hard choices, of course they can. I mean, countries have already stepped forward to say that they have intelligence capabilities. They may not be able to replicate everything the U.S. does, of course, but my sense is that they will be able to do things. Ammunition production is much greater than maybe what we think. A lot of ammunition produced in Europe today goes to Africa and the Middle East as normal business. That could be redirected to Ukraine. Countries could invest money in Ukrainian defense industry. So I just think of course it's a terrible thing that my country seems to be backing away from helping Ukraine, but European countries recognize that it's in their interest that Ukraine cannot fail, that they want to see Ukraine successful, and I think enough countries will eventually get this done. But of course, Ukraine has things to do too, to not only continue reorganizing, but to make the changes necessary to continue to attract women and men to want to serve.
And the last one, General, when you think about the Ukraine, what are you worried about?
Well, number one, I worry about the innocent people that are losing their life or losing everything they own. A whole generation of young people being affected. That I worry about that, of course. And then I worry that Ukrainians lose confidence in America. I mean, governments come and go, but there's 330 million Americans, and most Americans support Ukraine. And so I hope Ukrainians will be able to separate their frustration and disappointment in our policies, separate that from knowing that millions and millions of Americans support Ukraine.
General, thank you so much. Thank you so much to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the privilege, Lyudmila. Best wishes to you and your family for safety.
Thank you.